Hi everyone, good morning. Before I start my presentation, I would like to get to know you all better. And I have a few questions for you. How many of you love to read books? Oh, everyone, that's perfect. Tricky one, how many of you ever wrote a book? A few people here, that's nice. And how many of you ever designed or made a book? Designers here. Nice. As of me, I love to read books. I have never wrote a book, but I have made many. I'm Inka and I am a bookbinder. Okay, I will stand here. As I also believe, all of you can recall the nice feeling when you open the new book and you feel the fresh smell of the new paper and it just gets you all. As an unconditional book lover, I was always wondering what makes a book the book. As I discovered, it's many, many tiny details combined together to make one big masterpiece. And this discovery led me to get to know, to know more, to fall into the bookbinding process. So I started to study the restoration of the books. If some of you are not very much sure what does it mean, the restoration of the books, it basically means to bringing dying books back to life. And for a better image of how complicated it can get, just imagine you have to use all of these tools just to put the book together from the previous state it was. After 4 years, I was repairing the old historical books, and I realized I want to contribute to the book world not just by repairing all existing books. I was also wanted to making some extraordinary pieces by myself. That's when I decided to go to study to Academy of Fine Arts, and with a focus on the book design, to make some extraordinary books. Here I applied the gained knowledge about the bookbinding in the terms of when you know the rules, you can break the rules, and I started to experimenting about the possibilities of the bookbinding. I will show you 3 of my personal favorite projects, which I like to call the rule breakers. First example of the non-traditional bookmaking is this object. Yes, it's a table, it's a book table. It consists of 28 handmade sketchbooks, and this table simply brings all the artists together to collaborate and create together. The second example is hiding inside of this handmade bookcase. It's the project called Relay Printing, and it consists of 50 hand-printed graphic papers, and they are all put together in the form of the album and in the small pockets which needed to be transparent to make the visibility of the graphic papers from both sides, as there are sometimes signs on the other side. Biggest puzzle of this project was to came up with a great binding for the books to be strong enough to hold all the 50 papers, really thick papers we use for that, to hold it together, but to be delicate enough to not steal all the attention from the artwork inside. For this project, I chose the traditional Japanese bookbinding, and it turns out to be working perfectly for this one. The third project, it's my personal favorite. It's called Phobia Light. It's the interactive solar book of phobias, and it helps the phobic people to explain their fears and their phobias to non-phobic public. And I know the image is worth 1,000 words, and I will show you the short video about the interaction, how the book interacts with the sun. So you see how the blue pigment shows up right after the sun touches the surface of the paper, and it shows the phobic part of the illustration. I needed to put the extra white color on the top to make the texture to the solar pigment is hidden. These all projects were experiments, and they're very fun of work on. But the bookbinding is not always fun and games. Sometimes it can be pretty challenging, and for me the biggest challenge so far was the project when I decided to redesign the whole collection of the Slovak National Treasury, the folk tales, the collection of the folk tales. And it was the biggest challenge mainly because I decided to do it the traditional bookmaking way. It means all handmade, except the printing. So everything you see here on this picture, it's handmade. Now you maybe wonder what was the biggest challenge from this handmade process. Was it the handmade embroidery? Not really. Was it to make 72 hand-drawn illustrations, scan them and put them in the layer of 900 pages? No. No, it was okay. Was it the binding and the final? No, because that's when I know the project is finally coming to the end. The biggest challenge so far for this project was to read all of the 153 folk tales and stay focused on choosing the right parts of the text to illustrate them. When I'm speaking about the illustrations, you may notice that all of my projects are illustrated. That's because besides bookbinding and book design, the illustration is also my big passion. But back to the bookbinding. As I noticed, a lot of you love to read books. Some of you even wrote a book and designed the books. And if you also like to challenge yourself and maybe make a book at home, I have few tips for you. Good things to have are sharp cutter, quality paper, long thread, tons of patience, and remember, books are not dead. So thank you for your attention and have a lovely and creative day. Thank you.
Thank you, Inka. By the way, after the three speakers take the stage, we'll bring them back all to the stage so you guys have some time to ask questions. But that's going to be later. Next up, we have Thomas. Where are you, Thomas?
Hi, good morning. Well, there weren't that many people that actually made books, but maybe many of you actually made a bow and arrow when they were a child, right? Out of a branch that you found lying around. So how did that work out? Well, my first attempts probably looked quite similar, but my craft really got started when I had to make a bow and arrow for a video project. At least it had to look like a bow and arrow. It didn't have to be a functional weapon. And it wasn't, because it broke after the second shot. But before I tell you any more about my unusual craft, I'll give you a quick introduction with this video. So I started learning this craft because I was getting curious, like what would it take to make a genuine bow and arrow as they used to do it in the old days. So I started browsing the internet first, and then later I discovered very interesting books, and I was reading about the materials, the techniques, and the designs that were used by many different cultures throughout the world and the ages. I became a bowyer, as it was traditionally called in the olden days. Today I want to tell you something about the benefits of pursuing a craft. I want to tell you something quickly about the process that I go through and how the materials influence the process. And finally, I want to take a look with you at a design that is over 9,000 years old and see how that stands up to a modern scientific design. But first, a craft. Why pursue any craft at all? Well, first of all, it's very rewarding in itself to make something from scratch, and it gives you an instant sense of accomplishment and pride. But I also find that my craft, it re-energizes me after a long day work at the office. I think it's therefore quite complementary to do a manual craft with, for instance, a computer job. And I like to compare that to the way that, for instance, a farmer uses rotation crop, because you can't grow the same crop over and over again on the same soil. Okay, so moving to the process. I made this illustration of the 5 elementary stages that I go through when I make a wooden bow and arrow, or just a bow for now. Well, the first stage is cutting and splitting of the tree. And I do that because it's always better to work from the log when you're making a bow. It's better to work from a log than it is to work from a wooden board, because actually the design of your bow starts the moment the tree is first cut. And because you're working with wood, and when you work with wood, you just cannot force your will upon the material, because every tree has its own unique features, every species of wood has its own unique features, but every piece of wood is also unique in itself, and you have to incorporate that into your design. You have to incorporate what is called the character of the wood, and that will also give the bow its character in the end. Then next is the seasoning. Well, the wood has to dry for some time to make sure it's stiff enough, and it usually takes a couple of months. It depends on the volume of the wood. It can, it can be slower, can be quicker. But after that, you get to the shaping, where you can lay out your design in more detail. And when it's shaped, you get to the process which is called tillering. Tillering is the stage where you're teaching the bow to bend, which means that you put it in a vise and you draw it and you gradually pull it further and further to see if you get the right curvature. And you make adjustments if anything looks out of place, and then you check it again. And this is particularly nerve-wracking in the final stages when you draw the bow to its full draw length, because that really is a make or break moment in making a bow. Because any kind of defects in the wood that you didn't notice before, or any kind of mistakes that you make during the process, will probably make themselves apparent in this stage. And when it does, it's usually with a soul-shattering, snappy sound. But when you and the bow live through this stage, at least you probably have a functional weapon that you can take out for testing and finishing. Okay, finally, this is an image of a bow that was found in Denmark. It's well over 9,000 years old, and actually it's one of the oldest bows that has ever been found so far. And also, modern physicists have come up with a design which they deem to be the most efficient design when you want to create the fastest bow out of this material. So let's see how the two designs compare. Two identical designs, 9,000 years apart. What I mean to show with this is that every culture with the same requirements in the same kind of situation will eventually come to the ultimate design. Now that doesn't mean that all the bows around the world are the same, because the situations change and the requirements change. So you have short curvy bows for nomadic cultures like the horse riding Mongolians or the Turkish people. And you'll find long bows in South America and Papua New Guinea. And well, So how about you, all those years ago, when you were a child? I mean, did you use the best material when you were making your bow? Oh, maybe not, but you used whatever material was available to you. And you probably used it to the best of your ability. So was it a perfect design? Well, if your requirement was to have fun with it, then I can only ask you, did it do its job? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And next up, we've got Rally. So come to stage.
Hi everyone. Super nice to be here this morning. Thank you all for coming out. I will tell you about my paintings and how I gained more creative confidence by practicing. Oh yeah, that's me. My story with craft started with my grandfather, and he used to be a master of a particular kind of craft. He used to make leather harnesses for horses. And from what I can remember watching him work in his tiny little workshop in our garden, this was really tough work. You know, he would make everything by hand. He would have to work the leather and literally spend days to just repair something. And I think that because of what I saw from my grandfather, I was left with that really traditional idea of what craft meant. I saw it as that thing that you had to be, you know, trained for very many years, and that you had to have particular type of skills. Obviously, in many cases, this is the case. But I realized that, you know, as I was kind of trying different things over the years, from photography to sewing to painting, I realized that there could be a very kind of low threshold to starting a craft. There are a lot of courses available. You could kind of try YouTube and see what happens. And so this was kind of my case. I just taught myself to do all of these things. That's not a spelling mistake, by the way. I was speaking to my Swedish friend Camilla, and I told her that I'm giving this presentation on the theme of craft. And she said, oh, you know, that's actually quite funny, because craft spelled with K in Swedish means power. It means strength. And this is something that really stayed with me, because as I was, you know, more recently practicing my painting, I realized that this is exactly what painting meant for me. It meant kind of gaining creative strength and creative confidence. And this wasn't really always the case. It's kind of a, you know, ideal scenario to think, you know, focus on the process and practice your craft kind of loosely from what the end result will look like, because this is what I was kind of striving towards. And there were several things that really helped me get there, to remove kind of my process and how it felt to paint from really, really worrying how it's going to look like in the end and if people will like it. And so I started buying these sketchbooks, and this is the first one that I got, and it was really kind of my space. It was my space of experimenting and kind of getting into painting or drawing and see what's going to happen. And then I started making these, and they were literally kind of a way to spend time with myself, I guess. And I would start with just a couple of lines, and then, you know, it just turned into something, and I didn't know how it's going to look like in the end. And this was really that space of removing expectations and just kind of immersing myself in the process and starting to appreciate it more. And so I finished that book, and then I really wanted to do something else, something different, and something that was kind of different from the pencil work. And so I started creating those, which incorporated a little more color, a little more shapes, and I mean, some of them weren't that awesome, others were nice. And what is more important is that as I was doing it, I realized that I was creating a kind of a visual library. I was creating a vocabulary of different shapes and colors that I liked, and I thought they worked together. And so I started taking these books everywhere with me, and more recently on vacation to Japan, I took some of the small sketchbooks and some of the really small paper, it's literally that big, and I made these. And I thought they were kind of onto something, and I got home and I made more. And by that time I thought, okay, I feel like maybe more of a style is forming, and I was ready to go a little bigger. And so I created those. And this was really kind of a representation of my process, because it started small. It started with sketchbooks and really small format paper, and later on I essentially used the elements that I had created in my sketchbooks to incorporate in the larger pieces. They're like 60 by 70. And you know, as previously, I just really wanted to try something different, which kind of repeated the same process, and I started making those. And I started with making a bunch of the small ones, just see, you know, how they're going to work, and later on they served as inspiration for the big ones in terms of colors, and well, the shape is kind of the same. And if I can leave you guys with maybe something that really helped me get into it, just remove expectations and go for it. You know, we like to compare ourselves to social media or to peers, but essentially do it for yourself and be present in the moments when you're creating your craft, whatever it is, because this is what matters, and this is when you kind of keep an open mind to create, and you allow for your creativity to kind of flow. And it really helped me to, secondly, to start with a very small format or a sketchbook that I could just close in the end of the day, pretend it was not there in case I don't make something I liked. And maybe that's going to be a nice tip for you to also find a sort of a format that feels comfortable. And finally, once things feel comfortable, maybe it's time to go out of your comfort zone and just, you know, try something bigger. I post a lot on my Instagram in terms of process. You can follow me if you want to find out more. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rally. So yeah, as I said, let's get Inka and Thomas also on stage now. And yeah, if you guys have any questions for any of them, just go ahead.
Hi.
I actually had a question for Thomas.
Hi.
The arrowheads, are you shaping those by hand? Because I saw some of them were made out of stone.
Yeah, those here. Well, the arrowheads that I have here, yeah, some of them are made out of flint, and I nap those out of rough stones. Some of them are made out of bottle glass, because glass, it actually works the same as very dense rock. I also have some obsidian at home, which is lava glass, which is also traditionally used, but I don't have any of those arrowheads with me now. Next question.
For all of you, do you work in a studio or out of your house or garage, or do you find it more comfortable to work with crafts?
I work kind of all over the place. I started out in my parents' garage, and that's still where my bigger tools are. But I also work at home in the attic, as you saw in the video. But I may go to a bigger workshop sometime soon.
Yeah, with me, it's literally anywhere. It's mostly at home, but I take the books everywhere, like coffee places and airplanes.
Yeah, a question for you actually as well.
Me?
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, so you make all these different kind of crafts and you started very small. And my question was, when did you choose to go like public, or do you also go with the tiny pieces of art to
On Instagram or on the internet?
All on the internet?
I mean, I think I very quickly started showing them to people, especially because I'm so interested in the process of it, and it was really kind of my goal to really remove myself from the end result and really pay attention to the process. And I would show them to people pretty quickly, and it wasn't that much for feedback, it's more to just get comfortable talking about it and showing them.
Thanks for Inka.
Hi.
How did you learn the crafting of baking before you started restoring?
Crafting of binding? Or
Yeah, the craft before you started restoring, how did you learn?
it was a high school program, and we, for the first 3 years, we were learning all the historical bookbinding processes, and then they allow us to touch the historical books, because before it could be just more damage. Yeah.
When you first started, did you ever think of making the paper as well for inside of your books?
We have that as well. Oh,
Sorry.
no problem. He has a question as well. No, we also learned the process of making the paper. We went in high school from the whole process of making the books by ourselves, including the paper, the binding, even working with the leather, and we also made our own parchment from the skin. Like some actually brought the dead skin of an animal, and we. Not from you. Okay, not talking about skin anymore.
Don't accept any more listeners.
Yeah, I will shut up now. Yeah.
So, do you guys have any tips to, as far as how experimentation sort of informed the work you do, and what advice do you have to help people experiment?
Learn the basics, maybe, to be able to bend them for yourself, to be able to experiment, and just don't be afraid of it. Just go for it, and don't. Oh, you don't like me. And even when you maybe ruin something, it doesn't matter, because it's your experiment. Like, it's your work. Just keep on working, and it will eventually come to the result as you want.
Yeah, I would just have to say that you go with your excitement. If you see something that inspires you, and then you go and, yeah, I mean, it's the saying, like aim for the moon, you may hit the stars.
Yeah, a tip for experimentation. I guess, yeah, it's really, as I said, it's just you just go for it. And for me, it's really helped to kind of create my own environment. Then, I don't know, just at home in your living room, you just have to go. And it takes a while before something starts to come out of it. But like, pay attention to the process. It's going to be fine, basically, at a certain point. You have to fail, you have to learn, from, from the mistakes. And yeah.
For example, with the solar book I was making, I made it all at home in my room, so I didn't have special equipment for it, and I had to, I got some idea how it should be, how the process should be, and when I started working on it, it wasn't like that at all. Like, it wasn't like I imagined it, and the print didn't catch on the paper, the solar didn't work that well, and even on my presentation day there was raining, so there was no sun. So I just had to really push it out of the window and like, yeah, it is there, the blue color will go. So you just have to try.
Yeah, I also think that's very useful to get a feel for your materials and try out different things. Personally, I try and find my own materials and make it a priority to make everything from scratch. So I don't go out and buy something. You just go and go out and see if you can find whatever material comes your way, and then try something with it. It's really exciting to me.
Yeah. So when did, maybe it hasn't yet, or when did it come to a commercial point for you guys, and how did you feel that transition went? Did you enjoy it, or did you like want to stop it because it's a kind of like a hobby thing? What is the process there for all of you?
Well, for me, yeah, that is a good question. It's because I always try and look for ways in which this, which is just my personal interest, can benefit other people, and market it through that. But I always like to keep doing this for my own sake, for my own satisfaction. I don't sell out on this hobby. And it's become more than a hobby, of course, but I still feel like I hold all the cards, and it's not my main source of income. So that also gives you the liberty to work it the way you want. And it's really difficult with I think that goes for all traditional crafts. It's very difficult to market them nowadays, and that's why they went out of style. Why they went away. So yeah.
Yeah, with me, I guess the moment I started showing a little more of it online and also to friends, I think naturally my circle of friends and family, they really wanted to support me, and I did end up selling to friends and family. And later on, posting more on social media, people started to get in touch and to ask for them. So I think it kind of happened naturally, but I definitely had to get them out there and show that they were available.
And for me, I'm on the starting point of the career of the bookbinder, but I'm trying to keep the balance, to keep the bookbinding and making the books as sort of hobby that also makes money, but I have a normal job which keeps me sane. Because if I focus too much on art, it just drains you out and you burn out very fast. So that's why I try to keep the balance in between those two.
One final question.
Yeah.
Just on the topic of support, have any of you had to deal with any negative backlash from family or friends when it came to, I guess, pursuing a creative path? And if so, I mean, how do you respond to that?
I would start the microphone. I would say my parents are my biggest critics, in good terms as well. So when I come to my mom and I show her, like, oh, look, I made a book. It's like, yeah, but what is this? Like, this could be better. It's like, oh. So it's kind of moved me towards to like just a constructive criticism. That's good.
Yeah, more like talking about a tidal wave of negative backlash. Now first, my parents weren't all that happy about all the wood chips that I left in the garage all the time, and it used to be paved with it. Yeah, nowadays I clean up more tidy after myself. And then when I started to live with my girlfriend together, there's always it's just a weird hobby, and you bring in all these weird kind of materials that you just happen to find on the street. And I'm like, oh, look what this idiot just left by the trash today. And it just takes up space, and it's not always, and it doesn't always come in at a convenient moment. So yeah, that's it.
That's it. So I mean, the guys will be here after the event, so if you want to still stick around and talk to them, I think it's going to be possible. Just before we finish, a few notes. You can. Yeah, give it up for them.